Evan Marshall had survived enough budget meetings to know exactly when a room was about to slide into nonsense, but even he wasn't prepared for the moment his own mouth betrayed him. "Should we just skip the budget review and hand the money directly to whichever vendor gave you a free water bottle last quarter?" he said aloud, not even bothering to lower his voice. His comment bounced off the glass walls of the Q4 budget conference room like a rubber ball someone didn't ask for. The new vice president, Tyler Grant, 6 months into the job and already addicted to buzzwords, had just proposed reallocating $450,000 away from internal risk audits and toward external relationship cultivation. Translation, according to Evan: overpriced networking events and vendor-sponsored retreats disguised as strategy summits. The room paused. Then, as if on cue, muffled laughter spread from the junior analysts. One of the finance directors coughed mid-chuckle and nearly spilled his latte. Even old Mr. Hemsworth, who had been with the company since spreadsheets were printed on green and white paper rolls, cracked a smile. Everyone, except Tyler. Tyler sat perfectly still, pen frozen mid-tap, staring at Evan with an expression that hovered somewhere between confusion and offense. Trying to decode humor wasn't his strong suit. He approached jokes the same way he approached everything, like a spreadsheet error hiding inside cell F14. Evan didn't retract anything. Not his sharpest joke, not even top 10. Last week, he'd called the company's vendor onboarding process speed dating, but with background checks and questionable tax disclosures. And no one blinked. Because for 15 years, Evan Marshall had been director of vendor risk and contract controls, the guy who caught financial rot before it metastasized. He had read more contracts than most people read cereal boxes. His job required precision, blunt honesty, and the occasional sarcasm to stay sane. Up until that moment, everyone recognized that. Tyler should have rolled his eyes and moved on. Evan expected to be back at his desk by mid-afternoon, tinkering with the vendor access matrix that no one else understood, but everyone pretended to. He was wrong. Tyler scooped up his leather-bound notebook, gave Evan a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, and strutted out like a man who believed strongly, too strongly, in his own TED Talk confidence. By 5:00 p.m., Evan received an Outlook invite from HR for a brief sync the following morning. No agenda, no explanation. Just the corporate kiss of doom. Please join. Evan didn't panic. He had seen discomfort cycle through leadership many times. VPs rose and fell like seasonal allergies. Many arrived thinking vendor compliance was a formality, only to leave when they realized the job involved real liability exposure, regulatory requirements, and system vulnerabilities that didn't go away just because someone liked a vendor's holiday gift basket. Still, something in Tyler's eyes lingered. It wasn't just irritation. It was personal. Like Evan's joke had cracked through the VP's polished exterior and poked a bruise hidden underneath. That night, Evan sat at his small kitchen island with a cup of cheap red wine and an old detective show humming in the background. He joked about it over the phone with his brother. "They're not firing you over that," his brother said. "You'd think," Evan replied. But corporate America had entered a new era. Sarcasm was now treated like a workplace hazard. The next morning, he wore his second-best blazer, packed a yogurt, and walked into the HR meeting at 8:00 a.m. sharp, expecting a lecture at worst. Instead, he found Tyler already seated, scrolling through his phone, pretending Evan wasn't there. The HR rep, Rachel, newer than the paint on the conference walls, looked like she'd rehearsed her smile in the mirror and still wasn't sure she got it right. No one offered coffee. Tyler finally looked up, crossed his legs like a man imitating confidence from a seminar, and said, "Your tone yesterday was unacceptable. No greeting, no courtesy. Just a blunt accusation delivered like a line from a poorly written script." Evan leaned back. "Here we go." Evan kept his expression neutral as Tyler repeated the line with slow, deliberate emphasis, as though volume and cadence could turn a flimsy accusation into company policy. "You undermined leadership in front of cross-functional partners." Tyler continued, barely blinking. That contributes to a hostile environment. The phrasing was so rehearsed that Evan half expected Tyler to flip over a flashcard labeled Leadership Accountability, Script A. Rachel, the HR rep, nodded along with the solemnity of someone attending a town hall rather than a conversation about one sarcastic remark in a 2-hour meeting. She kept glancing at Tyler, as if searching for confirmation she was reacting correctly. Evan took a breath. So, a sarcastic comment is hostility now? He asked calmly. Tyler ignored the question. This wasn't the first time, he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside was a printed email, anonymous, written in vague language about dismissive tone and misalignment with leadership culture. No details, no dates, nothing actionable. The kind of complaint that could have been written by anyone who disliked humor on principle. Evan skimmed it, closed the folder, and pushed it back. So this is a personality conflict, he said. No, Tyler replied with the satisfaction of someone playing their favorite buzzword card. This is a culture issue. There it was, the all-purpose corporate trump card. Culture fit could excuse anything, from favoritism to flimsy accusations to reshuffling people managers didn't know how to deal with. Evan recognized the setup. He'd seen it happen to colleagues over the years. When leadership wanted someone gone, the script wrote itself. Rachel straightened papers unnecessarily and added, We'd like to schedule a quick conversation tomorrow morning to wrap this up. Not follow up, not discuss further. Wrap this up. Evan raised an eyebrow. Should I bring a box? Rachel blinked rapidly. Tyler didn't smile. Evan stood, nodded politely, and walked out with the controlled calm of someone who had weathered too many corporate storms to show panic. But the truth was, he wasn't panicking. Not even later that night, sitting at his kitchen counter with his laptop open, a glass of inexpensive wine beside him. He replayed the meeting in his head, not out of worry, but out of curiosity. Something about Tyler's urgency felt off. Not professional, but personal. For years, Evan had been the final gatekeeper in the company's vendor compliance chain. He understood contracts, loopholes, risk exposure, cybersecurity vulnerabilities, regulatory traps. Things most executives didn't want to think about. And unlike many directors, he insisted on reading every line of every major vendor agreement. That attention to detail had annoyed several executives over the years, but it had also saved the company from fines and lawsuits more than once. And now, with the company in the middle of a confidential acquisition process, Evan had been even more meticulous. That was what led him to the detail that would end up changing everything. He opened the internal server and pulled up the master services agreement attached to the acquisition documents, a 200-page tangle of legal language he had memorized more thoroughly than some people memorize birthdays. Section 6.2. Final Vendor Risk Review Signatory Required, Evan J. Marshall, Director of Vendor Risk and Contract Controls, irrevocable. No substitutions without written release from him. He stared at the clause again, its implications sinking in. He had fought to insert that line during negotiations months earlier because he knew how easily last-minute vendor changes or overlooked compliance issues could sabotage a deal. No one had questioned it then. They assumed he'd still be around. The buyers certainly expected it. And now Tyler was trying to push him out without realizing that firing him would freeze the entire acquisition process. HR didn't know. Legal probably forgot. Tyler had absolutely no idea. Evan printed the page, scanned it, and emailed it to himself with a simple subject line: backup. Then, he deleted all traces from the company laptop, closed it gently, and slid it into his bag. He didn't know exactly how the next day would unfold, but he understood one thing with complete clarity. They were about to cut the wrong wire in their own machine, and he wasn't going to lift a finger to warn them. Evan arrived at the office the next morning at 7:59 a.m., a minute early on purpose. He wore the same navy blazer he'd worn the day he was promoted years ago. A small, silent reminder to himself of what he had built long before Tyler strutted into the company with his buzzwords and insecurities. Instead of breakfast, Evan carried only his badge, his charger, and the company laptop wrapped neatly in a padded sleeve like a parting gift he hadn't asked to give. When he entered the HR conference room, Rachel was already typing on her laptop, her posture stiff enough to suggest she had rehearsed the meeting in her head at least 10 times. She offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks for coming in early," she said, closing the laptop halfway as if to signal seriousness without quite committing to it. Evan nodded and sat. The air in the room felt oddly still, like everyone was waiting for someone else to pull the pin on a grenade. Tyler entered a minute later, crisp suit jacket, immaculate hair, expression set in the performative neutrality he probably practiced in front of a mirror. He took the seat opposite Evan and crossed one leg over the other in an attempt at relaxed confidence. "We're going to keep this short," he began, folding his hands together. "We've reviewed the concerns and determined that your behavior is not aligned with the culture we're building. As a result, today will be your last day." He said it cleanly, like announcing the weather. No acknowledgement of 14 years. No recognition of the systems Evan built, the risks he mitigated, the fires he put out long before leadership even smelled smoke. Just a sterile sentence scripted for convenience. Rachel slid a single-page document across the table. A standard termination agreement. Evan glanced at it but didn't touch it. "We can walk through the details," Rachel said, "but this is a straightforward separation. HR will process your final paycheck, and IT will revoke your access in the next hour. You'll need to return your laptop and badge before you leave." Evan tapped the padded sleeve beside him. "Right here." Tyler nodded briskly. "Good, and we'll ensure this transition is smooth for everyone." Evan almost laughed. Smooth. Nothing about what was coming would be smooth. Not for Tyler, not for leadership, not for the acquisition team already celebrating early in private Slack channels. "Any questions?" Tyler asked, clearly expecting Evan to decline. "Just one," Evan replied. "Who will be signing the final vendor risk review for the acquisition?" Rachel blinked. Tyler didn't. "Legal will handle any required signatures," he said. "We're restructuring oversight." Evan shook his head slowly. "That's not how the contract reads." Tyler leaned forward, irritation leaking through the corporate polish. "Evan, the deal is well underway. We'll take it from here." Evan slid his bag aside, folded his hands, and spoke with calm precision, the tone he used when explaining risk exposure to executives who never listened. Section 6.2 of the MSA specifies that the final vendor risk review must be signed by me. By name. Irrevocably. No substitutions allowed without my written release. Rachel's face went pale. Tyler's expression didn't move at first, then cracked ever so slightly, like a fault line forming under pressure. "That clause doesn't override internal personnel decisions," Tyler said, voice tightening. "It absolutely does," Evan replied, "because it's binding for the buyers. They won't proceed without that sign-off. If I don't sign, the acquisition stalls." Silence hit the room like a dropped weight. Rachel looked between them, unsure whether to intervene or sink beneath the table. Tyler opened his mouth, closed it, then forced out, "We'll have legal amend the language." Evan shook his head again, slower this time. "You can't amend it. The buyers already countersigned. Any amendment would require renegotiation, which would require disclosure of changes, which would raise questions about internal risk controls." A pin could have dropped and echoed. Tyler sat back, tapping one finger against the table in a rapid, irritated rhythm. Evan recognized that sound, panic disguised as strategy. "So," Evan continued, "if today is my last day, the deal stops today too." Rachel whispered, "Oh my God," without meaning to. Evan stood, lifting the laptop bag. You said we'd keep this short, he said calmly. I'll let you handle the fallout. Evan left the room without waiting for permission, pacing down the hallway with the laptop bag slung over his shoulder and a quiet steadiness in his steps. He wasn't smiling. This wasn't triumph, not yet, but there was a clarity settling into his chest that felt sharper than confidence. Behind him, the conference room door stayed closed for a solid minute before voices rose in frantic, muffled tones. He imagined Tyler's voice cracking under strain while Rachel typed desperately, probably to legal, then compliance, then anyone who might rescue the spiraling situation. He didn't linger. He walked to his office for the last time, passing coworkers who nodded at him, unaware of the internal earthquake happening 2 floors above their pay grade. Evan shut the office door behind him and finally exhaled. 14 years. He picked up the framed picture of his sister's kids, wiped a thumb over the dusty corner, and set it gently inside his tote. Next went his notepads, filled with meticulous vendor audits, notes about systems people forgot existed, red flags he flagged long before anyone thanked him for it, and a jar of pens he'd bought with his own money when the budgeting team accidentally cut administrative supplies 3 years in a row. He packed with care, not sentimentality. The job had shaped his life, yes, but it wasn't his identity. Not anymore. 10 minutes later, he left the office carrying nothing but the tote, the laptop he was returning, and his badge dangling from 2 fingers. At the elevator, he ran into Mark, a director from finance who had laughed with a half-choked coffee during the now-famous budget meeting joke. "Hey, man," Mark said, eyes scanning Evan's bag. "You heading out early?" Evan lifted the badge slightly. "Something like that." Mark's smile faded. "Ah, so it's like that." Evan nodded once. Mark muttered something about idiots running the asylum, then stepped closer. "For what it's worth, Tyler's already on thin ice. He's been pushing changes without looping in the integration team. Everyone's irritated." Evan filed that away, not because he needed it, but because it confirmed what he already suspected. Leadership was fragile, brittle beneath the surface, all gloss and no structural integrity. "Take care of yourself," Mark said as the elevator dinged. "You too," Evan replied, stepping in. As the doors closed, he caught Mark shaking his head, hands on his hips like he was watching someone walk toward a cliff in slow motion. Outside, the morning air was cold enough to bite. Evan crossed the plaza toward the visitor parking where he had left his car overnight, knowing it would disable his badge eventually. He placed the laptop and badge in the drop-off bin at reception before leaving, an act of politeness that wasn't required, but made the symbolism clean. By the time he reached his car, his phone buzzed nonstop. 3 missed calls from Tyler, 2 from Rachel, 1 from a legal number he didn't recognize. He didn't answer any of them. Instead, he sat in the driver's seat, hands resting loosely on the wheel, thinking through the next inevitable steps. He didn't intend to sabotage the acquisition, but he wasn't going to save a company that discarded him without blinking. The clause protected the buyers, not the executives trying to sprint toward bonuses before the ink dried, and the buyers would find out soon enough, likely within hours, that the final review they were expecting wasn't just delayed, it was legally impossible without him. He started the car and drove home, passing familiar streets that suddenly felt lighter, as if the weight of corporate delusion had been peeled away. When he walked into his apartment, he dropped his keys on the counter, fed his cat, and brewed a cup of coffee that tasted freer than any office pot had in years. He had barely taken his second sip when his phone rang again. Tyler's number, vibrating so insistently it nearly slid across the table. Evan let it ring until it stopped. A few seconds later, a text appeared. "We need to talk. Urgent. Call me immediately." Evan deleted it without opening it. He wasn't being petty. He was being thorough. An hour later, another message arrived, this time from an unknown number. "This is Derek Carlson with Northbridge Capital. Please call me at your earliest convenience." It was beginning. Evan smiled faintly into his coffee. They'd discovered the clause. Evan didn't call Derek back immediately. Instead, he set his coffee down, walked to the window, and watched the traffic move below like nothing extraordinary was happening, even though he knew the acquisition team at Northbridge Capital was probably in a full-blown scramble. The only people who ever reached out from a private equity buyer before close were usually lawyers or senior partners, the kind who didn't waste time unless something serious had cracked. 10 minutes later, curiosity and pragmatism finally nudged him to return the call. Derek picked up on the first ring, voice tight, clipped, and all business. "Mr. Hale, thank you for getting back to me. I'll be direct. Our team is attempting to finalize pre-close vendor risk documentation, and we've run into an issue." Evan kept his voice neutral. "What kind of issue?" A moment of silence, then Derek said, "Clause 6.2 in the MSA addendum." Evan almost smiled. The buyers had found it. "I see," Evan replied calmly. "Yes, that clause requires my signature before final acceptance." Derek exhaled sharply. "Correct. And your company's leadership is claiming you're unavailable due to internal transitions." Internal transitions. That was one way to describe being shoved out the door over a sarcastic budget joke. Evan didn't correct him. Derek continued, "We cannot proceed without the required signatory, legally, procedurally, or from a compliance standpoint. This is non-negotiable." And their senior VP assured us multiple times that the necessary reviews were aligned and ready for completion today. Evan leaned against the counter, sensing the undercurrent. Frustration mixed with suspicion. "I understand," he said, "but as of this morning, I'm no longer employed there." Derek paused, the kind of pause where someone restrains a curse. "And you were terminated this morning?" "Yes." "Over what reason, if I may ask?" "A disagreement over culture alignment," Evan said plainly. Translation: "They didn't like my tone in a meeting yesterday." Derek didn't respond at first, and when he did, he sounded more irritated than surprised. "Unbelievable. They assured us there would be no staffing disruptions until after close. Firing the only person authorized to complete a mandatory review is—" He cut himself off, professionalism pulling him back. "Mr. Hale, would you be willing to meet with us today? We need clarity, and frankly, their leadership is offering very little." Evan considered. He wasn't trying to be a hero, but he wasn't going to be the scapegoat for a $90 million implosion either. "Yes," he said, "I can meet." Derek gave him an address, Northbridge's temporary acquisition office downtown, and asked him to come within the hour if possible. Evan changed into a clean button-down, grabbed a notebook, and left his apartment with a steadiness that surprised him. He expected nerves, maybe anger, but what he felt instead was a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. When he arrived at the office, a glass-walled suite buzzing with urgency, Derek, a sharp-eyed man in his 40s, with the posture of someone accustomed to crisis, greeted him immediately and ushered him into a conference room. 3 people were already inside: a legal counsel, an integration manager, and a compliance specialist who looked like she'd been awake since the previous day. Derek opened a folder. "We'll get straight to it. We need to confirm whether you knowingly inserted this clause without leadership approval." Evan raised an eyebrow. "Inserted?" "No. It was reviewed. I flagged the risk exposure 3 times, provided documentation, and received written approval from then CFO Morgan." He signed off on the final language. The legal counsel flipped pages rapidly. "Do you have copies of this correspondence?" "Yes," Evan said. "Personal copies. I can forward them." Derek nodded. "And is it true that no other individual can legally approve the vendor risk review for the acquisition?" "Correct." The clause was designed specifically to prevent last-minute substitutions or rubber-stamped reviews. It protects the buyer, your team, from undisclosed vendor liabilities. The compliance specialist looked up, startled. "So firing you means the deal can't close today?" Evan met her eyes. It means it cannot close at all until the review is completed. Derek leaned back, jaw tight. They hid this from us. Or, Evan said, they didn't understand the implications, which, honestly, was worse. The room fell silent for several seconds as the weight of his statement settled in. Then Derek said, "Mr. Hale, would you be willing to walk us through the vendor risk exposure today?" Evan nodded. The truth was, he'd been waiting 14 years for someone to finally listen. When the final week of the acquisition audit arrived, the entire office felt like it was running on tightly coiled wires. People whispered in hallways, HR avoided eye contact with anybody from finance, and every executive meeting ended behind closed doors that stayed shut too long. Meanwhile, I kept my routine painfully normal. Every report submitted on time, every request answered with calm precision, because nothing unnerves a guilty leadership team more than the person they tried to bury acting like they were already standing at the finish line. On Thursday morning, the federal investigators, plus the buyer's legal division, requested a full reconstruction of the company's financial controls spanning the last 12 months. This alone sent half of upper management into a quiet panic. But what truly broke them was the revelation that the investigators already possessed time-stamped documents, internal emails, flagged discrepancies, and signed approvals that contradicted several earlier statements made by the CEO and the executive team. I didn't need to say a word. I had already said everything months ago, just to the right people. By noon, the buyer's attorneys announced that the acquisition was being paused indefinitely pending a fraud and negligence investigation. The moment that news hit the internal Slack channels, the entire building seemed to exhale. Groups that had been pressured, overworked, or bullied suddenly looked like they were watching justice balance its scales in real time. Around 3 p.m., I received a call from the lead investigator. He wanted clarification on one specific discrepancy. A series of undocumented efficiency adjustments signed by COO Brent Lawson during the quarter when we had allegedly fixed workflow redundancies. I knew exactly what he was referring to because those adjustments were the very ones I flagged before getting fired in front of my entire department. I explained the timeline, the internal emails, the pressure to get the numbers right, and the fact that I had raised concerns but was told to be a team player. He didn't react, didn't gasp, didn't praise. He simply said, "Thank you. This aligns with additional information we obtained this week." That was the moment I realized they had more than enough. I wasn't the linchpin. I was just the confirmation. Friday morning began with a mass mandatory meeting called by the board. No one from the executive team led the session. Instead, 3 board members walked out, stone-faced and tired, like people who had spent the entire night signing documents they wished they'd never had to open. The chairman spoke plainly. "Effective immediately, CEO Daniel Mercer, COO Brent Lawson, and CFO Olivia Chase are placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of ongoing federal and state investigations." Gasps rippled across the room. A couple of managers looked like they wanted to sink through the floor. Someone in the back actually whispered, "Oh my God." The chairman continued. "We have also been informed that the prospective acquisition has been canceled. A restructuring process will begin next quarter." If the earlier whisper was shock, this one was a knife. Several employees cursed under their breath. The executive team had promised everyone stability, bonuses, long-term security, all of it tied to a deal that collapsed because they tried to manufacture numbers instead of earning them. After the meeting, I packed up the last of my things. Not because I was being pushed out, but because I was done. My name had been cleared, my documentation validated, and my conscience lighter than it had been in months. As I headed toward the elevator, dozens of coworkers approached me privately. "You were right. I'm sorry for what they did to you. Thank you for speaking up." Some of them looked guilty, some relieved, some furious on my behalf. But all of them understood now. One manager even muttered, "They fired the wrong damn person." Outside, the air felt oddly fresh for downtown Chicago. I took one long breath before walking toward the parking garage. My phone buzzed, an email from the lead investigator. "Your cooperation was critical. If you ever need a professional reference, you have one." Another buzz, this time from a CFO at a tech firm I had interviewed with. "We'd like to extend you an offer." I smiled for the first time in a while. They thought firing me would silence me. Instead, it amplified everything they tried to hide. And by the time the truth finished unraveling, the empire they built on arrogance and shortcuts collapsed right on top of them. Justice didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be patient. And I had been patient long enough.